Hi everyone, and thanks for coming to listen to this presentation. I'm hugely sorry I can't be there with you to share you this in person, but thanks nonetheless. I'm sure we've all been either deliverers or receivers of programs of learning, whether they be formal, non-formal, whatever they might be, whether they are online as we've all got very used to over the recent months, or whether they are good old-fashioned traditional courses with post-it notes and flip chart paper and all those kind of things that you can see in the bottom left here. Well, regardless of our position in those, you'll have heard quite a lot about social learning theory so far today. And the idea here in this presentation is to talk to you about the learning of coach developers. Coach developers in this context are those who are responsible for the learning of coaches, whether that be in a mentoring or tutoring capacity, depending upon the organisational rhetoric or the place in which they find themselves. And we're interested here in the coach developer. But what you'll have already heard about social learning theory and the recent iterations of social learning theory so far today, or central to it, is to acknowledge that learners don't just sit in a room such as this. And they certainly don't sit on their own. They sit in that room within a much broader landscape of practice. There are many things which compete for our attention in our professional landscapes, and for this coach developer in this space there are various regulatory and professional bodies, national governing bodies, sports clubs, universities, even pieces of research that essentially are trying to tell this person something about their craft, about the art of being a coach developer. There are many competing things in their world. We can't possibly be a master of them all. But if we're to claim competence, in this case as a coach developer in the field, then we need as broader understanding and a working of these different powerful conceptions and competitions for our attention and for our learning as we possibly can. How do we make sense of all of the different bodies, of all of the different things that our profession is about? And then how does that work its way out into our practice? How do we negotiate our practice in such a way that we can be most effective in the different environments in which we operate? Acknowledging that just because we operate in one way in one environment doesn't mean that we operate in other environments in the same way, because they are different politically, culturally, contextually. We have just different jobs to do. Yet at the heart is still that same coach developer who needs to understand all of these broader mechanisms and tensions that there might be within this room. And there is so much more than is just on this particular slide here. There's so much more claiming and clamouring for our attention, seeking our allegiance in some ways. So much information out there, so many ways of doing things, so many people, bodies and theory that is claiming our attention. Essentially then, the piece of the puzzle that we're interested in terms of social learning theory in this presentation is taking that notion that learning is a process of identification. It is essentially identity work. And the Venga trainers offer us these three elements of identity work to help us better understand learning and how we negotiate our way through our landscape. They are terms of engagement. What do we engage with? Where do we spend our time? What courses do we go on? What podcasts do we listen to? What research do we read? And where essentially do we go? What are we engaged with? Identity is also about our imagination. Where do we think we're going? What can we see in the field, whether proximally or distally, that might inspire us to action or help us to see where we want to go? Whether that be key individuals in the field, maybe job roles. Where do we see ourselves in this broader landscape? And then to what do we align? Where do we put our flag in the sand? What do we want to be known as? What does our coach developer want to be known as? What type of theory, what type of label or thing might they align to? Is it the NGB badge that they want to wear and wear that with pride and wave that banner? Or do they not want to be that? Do they want to be more independent? Do they want to align with a particular theoretical work and be known to be working in that field or not? And maybe they've turned their attention elsewhere. The Venga trainers argue that these three conceptions are examples of identity work within the landscape. And this is the theoretical foundation that I want to talk to you about today and that underpinned the particular piece of research that I want to tell you about. This was our research question. How might, then, consideration of the concept of identification through engagement, imagination and alignment enable educators to better understand coach-developer learning in relation to a formal programme in this instance? So what we wanted to do was implement this process through a methodology called participatory and appreciative action and reflection. I haven't got much time to tell you about this today, but essentially this is supposedly a sort of third phase of action research. Essentially, we delivered a course, or two courses as you'll come to hear, and we wanted to better understand how we might construct them and co-construct them with the participants and with all the key stakeholders to try and ensure that we delivered the best possible package. There are 4 processes here that underpin that. We didn't follow these explicitly as in named stages or cycles like you might do in action research, but they are inherently part of what was in the following research. So the project that I'm going to tell you about features two cohorts of a programme that ran 18 months each for a course that we designed bespokely for a national governing body in the UK. There were 13 and then 11 coach developers on the first and second cohort respectively, and the 18 months ran with 1 study day per month at the institutional headquarters, with study tasks before and after and various other tutorials and things, and led to the award of a postgraduate certificate for those who were successful. As I've said, the first and third author, myself and Andy, we were the deliverers, formal deliverers of the course, and our second author, Harley, was a learning facilitator that we placed into the programme at the beginning of the second cohort, having completed the first one. What was this course about? Well, it was about 3 things. I'm not going to bore you with a long list of learning objectives. There were some. We boiled them down into these 3 things. We wanted to enhance the criticality of our participants. We wanted them to better understand their organisation, and we wanted to approach this acknowledging that learning is more than the acquisition of knowledge. In order to collect some data from our participants, we did all kinds of things throughout our 2 times 18 months. We often asked the participants to reflect in various different ways, presentationally, written, diary-wise. We ran focus groups at various stages and did all kinds of other things to collect data as we were going through in order to inform our 4 processes: to appreciate the gaze, to develop an appreciative gaze, to build practical wisdom, and to try and move forward in a positive sense of how we to better help our participants to learn. Following data analysis, we extracted 3 key themes that we're going to talk to you about today from the 5 listed on this slide. So the 3 that we're going to focus on for the purposes of this presentation are predispositions to the course, the epistemological development, criticality and theoretical congruity, and thirdly, the learning community. So let's just turn to the first, and apologies for the amount of information on some of these slides where we have some data. I will read them to you and then explain what we found or what we thought about them a little bit more. So Greg said this: "At the start, I was in a place of balance and was professionally drifting. I was frustrated at a lack of career progression and concern regarding a perceived lack of pathway. I'd only gained 1 promotion in 10 years, whilst concurrently becoming an informal sounding board for various people from national team youth coaches to top domestic league first teams, academy staff to academies to people working across the grassroots game, covering aspects of policy writing to supporting the reflective process of practitioners. After this, I'd reframed my career priorities through help of an informal mentor as well as through this course. I found some improved balance through prioritising personal well-being, recognising the need to be a more authentic version of self, and resist institutional conformity. I set out to strive for originality and constructive non-conformity." And we think this is a really good example of Greg appreciating the landscape in which he is operating. He's not solely worried about the course. In fact, as you'll see from both Greg and the following quotation, the coach developers were generally a little bit sceptical about the value of the course prior to enrolling. And in Greg's case, that was the reason for that was outlined in some of these things here. But he knows fundamentally that he is a great practitioner. He has an effective practice in all kinds of different places within the landscape, from those first teams to the academies. All kinds of people listen to his perspective, and he operates well across those environments. And so for Greg, partly our job was to help him to find his way through the landscape and to find value in those different roles. And not to say, for example, that we have the answer just on this course, but our job as practitioners in this space was to help him better negotiate his identity through finding his place in this landscape. A second predisposition was from Sarah. Again, Sarah was perhaps one of those who was relatively sceptical at the start of the course, thinking, what have these academics got to tell me about coach development? And then she said this: COPs, although I was already doing it, I never realised that's what it was called or what it was really there for. This is big for me because this is what I lead on nationally with the female stuff. I have 5 female groups that meet quite regularly and make up my COPs. The paper that Culver and Trudell wrote has probably helped me the most in terms of why some of them didn't work. The paper also spoke about having a facilitator. I see myself as a facilitator for all those groups. However, I'm not sure that is right. I need a designated leader within each of those groups for those to come up with their own agendas and outcomes. This was an excellent example for us of how, although initially sceptical, Sarah heightened her alignment to the course by essentially ultimately seeing value in the content of the course and how it might help her professional practice. So whilst she might have been engaged on the course throughout, and she was right from the beginning, in fact they all were, they attended, they did the tasks, but that's only one form of identity. We were interested in alignment and how they might perhaps be better aligned to the course or appropriately aligned. And this was an example of how Sarah became more aligned to the course through seeing its practical value and application. We focused quite considerably on trying to help the people, the coach developers on the course, to be more critical thinkers. And this resulted in them developing some quite deep level thinking. Bella said this: "The battle I went through last year was I felt I'd lost myself as a coach and not knowing really who I was. There was a few bits of feedback that said, we only know the NGBU, and I couldn't get my head around what that meant because that's my job, that's who I represent. Previously, you almost had to conform to a certain way of being a coach education tutor. We had a philosophy and we had to stick to it. I think when you've been doing it for so long, that kind of becomes you. Doing the course has made me look at myself a bit more. There's no right or wrong. I think that's kind of helped me in that I don't have to deliver a certain way all the time. There are different ways of doing things and it just depends on the context." So again, we were interested in Bella's identity here of feeling very institutionalized in one way, and in running the course from the perspective that we did and trying to help Bella to see the landscape of practice in which she was operating, we think we helped her to better understand her position within that landscape, to understand that there was more to her professional practice than just being quite so strongly aligned to the national governing body's way of doing it. And this helped her to be more critical, and it helped her to accept a position of criticality without necessarily feeling that she was contradicting either what she was delivering or the organisation that she was working for. As I said, at the end of the first cohort, we put in place a learning facilitator because we felt there was a really important function that we couldn't play as the formal tutors of the course. Regardless of the fact that we had probably quite a positive relationship with everyone, there were certain things that they just couldn't speak to us about or didn't feel they could speak to us about. Sophie, for example, said this: "I prefer to speak to Andy more than Don. I think that's because of Don's education background. Whereas Andy worked for the NGB, so he understands it a little bit more. But you've, Harley, simplified it, and I guess it's because currently you're going through a process, a PhD, which is again similar, and it's not so long ago that you've felt like that." And one of the challenges that we had, I guess, in running the course and in terms of alignment was that there is a scepticism within some national governing bodies of the value of academic work and of academic programmes. And this meant that whilst again they were engaged, we didn't necessarily see fantastic alignment straight away. It took quite a lot of time, and we certainly found that the facilitator really helped their alignment throughout that second cohort. In this case, because she simplified things. And in fact, simplification was one of those important processes. Jackie, for example, said this: "Having Harley within the PGC cohort has been a huge support. Harley relates tasks or discussion to simple terms, something that is much needed for me. Although we can ask the two tutors any questions, Harley has given something extra to the group. I honestly think I would have given up a long time ago without the support and discussions I've had from Harley. The learning facilitator's role we felt was really important in sustaining the group, of bringing people together, but also in aligning the group to the course and essentially helping them along with their learning journey. So what did we find? We found that their journeys were highly individualized. They were all so different. They all passed, but they occupied different spaces within the landscape and in their journey. We felt that we had a better understanding of their renegotiation of their identity by considering the concepts of engagement and alignment and imagination throughout the course. And in deploying this PAR methodology, we really felt we were able to be responsive to that and to help them with their negotiated identity. Their predispositions were huge, and we found that investing time in understanding where they were coming from and how they were entering the course was really important. And we also found that we were able to reconcile that juxtaposition between perhaps the clash of what they were trying to deliver as coach developers and what the NGB wanted them to do, and perhaps what they actually believed about learning and development. And the course helped them to perhaps reconcile those two things. Finally, whilst we've provided some evidence here about the benefits of facilitating, there are so many other forms of social learning leadership, enabling, vertical, core group, service, brokering and systems convening, that really need much more in-depth longitudinal investigation in ways like we have demonstrated here in future research. Thanks for listening, and I'd love to hear from you by using any of the details on this slide. Thank you.